I'm Alex.
And I'm Eddie.
Welcome to the 12th episode of Catch 52 of Politics podcast, brought to you by WDSR, Duquesne Student Radio.
We are now 40 weeks away from Inauguration Day 2021, and this week we decided to give you an episode in two parts, or two sections.
The first part, we will be devoting to what lots of those of you who gamble are maybe gambling on, and that's the potential vice presidential candidate.
And for the second part, initially we wanted to make this a whole episode and go onto Trump's website, look at his policies, and give them a full breakdown.
But
if you go to Trump's website, there's no policy section. So sorry, Jim, we're not giving candidates equal time because we can't.
We'll do our best to accurately cover Trump in the future. But if the Trump campaign isn't going to put a coherent list of policies on the website, then going through the promises kept section of the website is really the best we can do.
Yeah. So,
all right.
Yeah. Let's.
Also, before we get into VPs, we're recording this on, I don't even know what day of the week it is. It's April 17th. Cuomo came out yesterday and preempted Trump. On the May 15th opening, which I thought was like an interesting move. Just for it might just be like Cuomo being Cuomo, but and now Trump this morning is tweeting to liberate
Minnesota, Michigan, and Virginia, which all have semi-lockdowns, state imposed. So
that might be a problem if he's reelected president and has to, put down a rebellion that he himself incited.
Yeah.
Anyway,
let's get into the VP talks first.
VP talks, right? Things that matter.
Biden's VP pick is going to be very, very important. I was, doing some research, and fun fact, every single person that has run for president as a Democrat and has gotten any delegate is since 2000 is older than Joe, or is younger than Joe Biden, except for Joe Lieberman and Bernie Sanders. Again, John Kerry, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, John Edwards, Al Gore are all younger than Joe Biden, as well as anyone else that wasn't the nominee that still ran and got any delegate is younger than Joe Biden, except for Joe Lieberman and Bernie Sanders. So,
the VP is important.
Biden's old, and the VP pick, just as it would be for Sanders, is very important.
Oh, here's also how important it is. The Cook Political Report, which is kind of like 538's rival, if you want to say. Cook Political Report put out a I don't know if I want to call it a report or just a paper, talking about what happens if the president-elect dies before being inaugurated. Like, there's no constitutional provision for anything.
No, I don't know.
No, it would have to be a completely arbitrary Supreme Court decision. Yeah,
based on something. I mean, it would probably eventually just say, like, 22nd Amendment, it would go to the vice president. But it might also mean, the Electoral College would reconvene and revote. And
no. It's not what happens if the president-elect, because then it goes to the vice president. It's what happens if the president dies in between being elected on, like, in November and the Electoral College voting.
Oh.
Yeah, that was the real problem.
Yeah, because if
the electors nominate the president, then I think it's pretty simply vice president. But if he's not elected by the Electoral College...
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, I'm assuming it would just go to the vice president. The electors would all just cast their votes for the vice president, but...
Or it could be second choice.
Yeah, who knows? But yeah, I don't know. That could split the vote, which is a thing that I think the electors would talk about and probably not do, or all come to a general conclusion. But anyways, let's talk about the VP candidates. There are like 10-ish candidates on Biden's apparent shortlist. He said in an interview it was like 11 or 12, and every news site has been trying to figure out who that shortlist is. And
Yeah.
there's a kind of general agreement on who might be on the list. So we have a few candidates. We just want to go step by step and talk about them.
That said, this could be completely wrong.
Yeah.
Hillary really came out of left field when she nominated Tim Kaine.
Very much so, yeah.
So, but that said, Eddie has been vehemently reminding me that VP candidates do often come from the original pool of candidates.
Yes, so both George W. Bush ran against Reagan in 1980, as well as Biden running against Obama in 2008. So, and as well as Edwards running against Kerry in 2004, but obviously that wasn't a successful ticket. But
recently, though, that has not been the case. Pence, Trump, Kane, Clinton, and then before that,
Romney and
Ryan.
Yeah.
Did Sarah Palin run for president?
No, she did not.
Yeah, so there's been recently it's been the trend that the VP hasn't come from the field.
Yeah.
And I actually think that's kind of a positive trend, but I mean,
I think right now there's been a lot more geographic strategy put into who the candidate is, but with Biden, there's a lot more, at least gender politics strategy, but more social strategy versus geographic strategy, it seems, at least from his willingness to pick a woman, and that being his first criteria, at least publicly.
Well, I honestly think the whole thing about I'm going to pick a woman is literally just an electoral strategy.
Yeah.
Because Biden had a bit recently. Biden had a bit, if he could pull that off, where he's in an interview, he said that he didn't think he could reach Trump's base. So I'm like, okay, if he doesn't think he can reach Trump's base, then what's he going to do? He's going to increase voter turnout where it wasn't previously. And the only places where it wasn't previously were in urban African-American vote and white college-educated suburban women vote.
So my counter to the whole you can't reach Trump's base thing is that if you look at what Trump's base actually was that got him elected in those pivotal states, so in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Ohio, first off, they voted for Obama, but second off, there were not many of them. If you think about how many people in the state of Pennsylvania you need to sway for
80,000?
Maybe. If you think about how many people you need to sway,
he won by 80,000, so he needs to sway 40,000.
40,000 voters in all of Pennsylvania, in a state of a few million, in a state of at least 6 million voters.
Biden may be able to do that himself. And there's a couple of arguments, and this is the struggle. There's a couple of arguments for this. Number one argument, obviously, is so you can turn out more in Philadelphia suburbs. So you can turn out Berks County, and that's what a white female vice presidential candidate would definitely do for you, especially if she's from the Rust Belt.
Yeah.
Turn out Berks County. Turn out, for some reason, I don't know any other counties over there. Basically the equivalent of what the 17th and district in Western Pennsylvania used to be.
But Trump won by about 0.5% in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
So you need to change 0.25% of the voters in Pennsylvania to win Pennsylvania, and the same goes for Wisconsin and Michigan.
See, when you put it like that, it sounds much easier.
Yeah.
But then when you say you need to change 40,000 people's minds, it's like, I don't know.
If you look at Trump's popularity ratings, though, they've gone down in almost every single Midwestern state. So
RCP has him holding steady with Biden. RCP has him winning in a decent amount of polls.
Yeah, it's because Biden's not the most popular candidate. But if you look at Trump's approval state by state, it's not as
his approval state by state is not as good. I mean, right now he's got a 45% approval rating.
Yeah,
which is not the best, but it's not the worst.
Morning consult poll said that 57% of Pennsylvanians don't think Trump deserves re-election. His approval rating's at 40%.
Yeah.
So like the Trump base, the like core base is very, very strong, but those stragglers on the outside that actually got him elected are not that strong, and they're not that high in number, and especially not that high in percentage. If you think about the fact that the Democrats swayed probably 10, maybe 5% of the vote in the last election, I mean, that's 10
it's
times.
easily
That's
possible.
20 times than what they need to do in 2020.
Yeah.
So that said, let's get into VP candidates.
VP candidates. All right. So there's the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
The Kamala.
Yes. So a lot of people are talking about Kamala being the vice presidential candidate. I don't think that's a good idea.
I also don't think that's a good idea for two reasons.
Yeah.
Okay. Number one, Kamala Harris is not a progressive. Okay, that's not true. So Kamala Harris on policy is pretty progressive.
Mhm.
Kamala Harris does not have the progressive brand.
Nor does she have a progressive history at all. Her history as Attorney General of California
It's rough.
It's rough. Jailing parents of truant kids, withholding evidence from people on death row that eventually, once the Supreme Court told them to give the evidence over, got them exonerated because it was DNA evidence. Things like that. It's just not a great look on her resume. Also, if you're talking geographic politics, I mean, if you're going with the old school style of electing someone based on where they come from, you
Kamala
should
Harris from
never elect someone
California.
from California. But again, this kind of feeds into what I was saying with Biden playing more social politics. Having an African American, Indian American woman on the ticket is a good look socially.
That said, I could be totally wrong about this, and this might come off as really rough. I don't know if Kamala Harris is somebody who really speaks to Black women.
Biden overwhelmingly had more African American support than Kamala, as did Cory Booker. So, obviously Cory Booker doesn't fulfill Biden's promise of electing a woman as VP, but in terms of if his main goal was getting out the Black vote, then Kamala is not necessarily the person to do that.
And for a lot of other reasons. Okay, so if Kamala's not the person, then let's talk about somebody, a rising star, who definitely would be able to get out the Black woman vote, Stacey Abrams.
Yes. So Stacey Abrams is another name that's really being thrown out there a lot because of her just national profile. Yeah, after the Georgian election, and then also following her response to the State of the Union speech in 2019, and I believe she also gave it this year.
I didn't see.
And Biden sent out like some tweet that was like, "Oh, this was a great speech. You did a great job." But Stacey, yes, but the Stacey Abrams campaign has been not super public as to whether or not they like or dislike the prospect of being Biden's VP.
And interesting, I mean, the prospect of Stacey Abrams as a vice presidential candidate has been being teased
for basically the entire election for any candidate that was like, oh, you should do Stacey Abrams. Again, geographically, not necessarily the best strategy, but in terms of getting out, possibly pivotal voters, not a bad strategy.
Yes. That said, in response to everything, every time that she's been asked, and she's been asked so many times, she's just handing it off to staffers at this point.
Yeah.
It's been, Leader Abrams has been doing this policy. Bipartisan. There was a Rolling Stone reporter that asked her and asked one of her staffers, and the staffer goes, Leader Abrams would be honored to be asked to join the Democratic ticket, join the ticket of the Democratic nominee. But for now, she's focused on fighting voter suppression and ensuring an accurate census. She will cast her personal vote along with fellow Georgians on March 24th.
So there's that. But a few months or weeks beforehand, she, in an article with BuzzFeed, a separate advisor, I assume, said...
Let's hope it was a separate advisor, because this was the same person. That's wild.
In response to whether or not she'd want to be Biden's nominee in specific, they said, what makes it particularly exploitative is that Biden couldn't be bothered to endorse Stacey in the gubernatorial primary. Now he wants her to save his ass. That's some serious entitlement. Which is not the most positive quote. And definitely something that the Republican campaign might be able to pick up on and use pretty easily, in the same way that they utilize the fact, the alleged quote from Obama talking to Joe Biden that you don't need to do this, Joe, you really don't.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
There's a quote like that from Andrew Cuomo as well.
Yeah, so like those types of quotes, they've already been using, and I wouldn't be surprised if Stacey was the pick that if a quote like that would also come out.
Yes, yes,
Um,
absolutely.
that said, Stacey Abrams almost swung, or probably would have swung, depending on your stance on whether or not voter suppression happened in that state, the state of
Okay.
Georgia, to a Democratic gubernatorial seat, which is pretty wild. And if you can do that in a state as deep south as Georgia,
Mm-hmm.
you might be able to get out more of the vote in Pennsylvania, especially in cities, and same with like in Detroit or in Milwaukee or any
Absolutely.
other place in the Midwest where there are higher populations of African American people.
And I mean, black women have swung unswingable elections before.
Yeah.
Doug Jones.
Yes, very much so. So
But let's keep talking. Let's keep talking about women, because there is let's say Stacey Abrams doesn't show up. And I mean, she's a she's a state senator. Like, that's
in terms of
perfectly okay.
Her actual resume outside of running
much.
is not the greatest, but she's one of the more charismatic rising stars of the Democratic Party, and also does have a national profile. I mean, I can't really complain about her national profile, considering I supported Pete in the primary and he was the mayor. So like, it would be very hypocritical of me to say anything negative about that.
Wow.
Yeah, but that said, let's move on. I think
talk about somebody who has a national profile, right?
Yes.
And probably somebody who has a lot more experience than Stacey Abrams. So let's talk Gretchen Whitmer for a second.
Mm-hmm.
So she's the governor of Michigan.
Yep.
She's been talked about a lot in the past like 2 months, because I guess she's been, and not all of it has been positive.
Mm-hmm.
She's gotten a little bit of blowback from, she's gotten some blowback from conservative groups, and I think some medical groups as well, on how she's handled the state lockdown and quarantine procedures.
Mm-hmm.
She definitely seems to have had some kind of explosive phone call with the president and vice president, because it got Trump talking about her at one of his news conferences. He calls her the woman up in Michigan.
That said, that is, again, a good national profile. She's displayed herself pretty immediately as a large, strong woman in power, especially considering she's only been in power for maybe a year and a few months now.
Really? I didn't know that.
She was inaugurated in 2019, part of the Blue Wave. So, she's kind of that Obama effect of being in an office of power for 2 years and then going somewhere else. But she's also made a national profile for herself, similar to Andrew Cuomo, but younger,
right,
and female and not from New York. And so she might not be the worst pick. She's from Michigan. She obviously got elected in Michigan, so she might be able to swing Michigan and maybe a state that borders it, such as Wisconsin, or a state near it like Pennsylvania, or probably not Ohio, but maybe Ohio.
Yeah.
there's the possibility of being able to have that person that's like, I'm from here, I know your concerns. Joe's old Joe, he's from Scranton, PA, just like here.
Old Joe.
And everyone knows Joe. He's from Scranton. He took the Amtrak into work every day. And just like, I think having Gretchen Whitmer especially would be a good complement to Biden's kind of like gritty, hardworking American portrayal that he has, whether or not he is or is
Come
not
on,
actually that.
We're America. Yeah.
Whether or not he is or is not actually the blue collar American he claimed to be, he has that image, and I feel like having Gretchen Whitmer might really complement that.
She would be a good compliment.
Yeah.
Now there's another person. There's another name from Michigan that is getting floated, and I don't know why. Debbie Stabenow, who is
senator from Michigan, and she's also
70.
She's 70. She doesn't really have a national profile outside of being a U.S. senator. It'd be kind of like picking Bob Casey as your VP, or like picking someone like Tim Kaine as your VP.
I'd be down for picking Bob Casey.
Yeah, no, I love Bob Casey, but also, like, he doesn't have that national profile that even Gretchen Whitmer has, but especially not that like Stacey Abrams or even Kamala Harris has, where people know who they are. That was a big problem that a lot of the candidates faced early in the election, especially people like Pete, where no one knew who they were, so they weren't polling high at all because people just didn't know who they were. And the similar thing goes with Tim Kaine, and a similar thing would probably happen with Debbie Stabenow. And I can't speak as to whether or not she is or isn't, a charismatic person, but considering the fact that you haven't heard very much of her, that does speak to something.
Okay. So there's two more candidates who have been talking a lot that we should also mention. Let's start with somebody who I think would be a great VP candidate, Amy Klobuchar.
Yeah, I think Amy would also be a great VP candidate. Again, kind of filling in that whole Gretchen Whitmer, I'm from the Midwest, I'm like you guys type, and just kind of seep that Minnesotan into Wisconsin and maybe into
a lot of white women voted for Amy Klobuchar. A lot of suburban white women voted for Amy Klobuchar. And if that's what Biden's going to go for, he's going to go for sort of like that two-pronged attack with Biden working to get out urban African-American vote and then Amy getting out the suburban white college-educated women vote. I think that could be a ticket that leads to that.
Because those two votes were what got the Democrats the House back in 2018.
Absolutely.
And so if they work together in that ticket, that might be that could be possibly a very winning ticket.
And unlike Kamala, Klobuchar doesn't have a history of attacking Biden in very public places.
No, she was a prosecutor, but she was also a prosecutor, but she doesn't have that same history, and she attacked Kamala on not having that same history.
Exactly. The only thing about Klobuchar is that she has a reputation for being a hard ass.
Yeah, and also has the highest turnaround in any congressional office, including House of Reps people. I love that statistic. There are reports of her like angrily driving her car to the airport because no one would pick her staffer that she uses as a chauffeur wouldn't go, and so she left the car parked in the pickup line. There are some not good stories about her, but also those are just stories I don't know whether or not they're true.
And also her husband had coronavirus. I feel like that's just a terrible but also useful story that can be weaved when it comes time to have Joe's coronavirus recovery plan. Just like millions of Americans, my vice president's husband had coronavirus. She's gonna take care of you. I feel like that sells pretty well.
In terms of other presidential candidates, Elizabeth Warren has also been thrown out there.
You could have done a much better transition.
In terms of presidential,
in terms of people who've come up with coronavirus plans, it was there.
Yeah,
okay, whatever.
But Elizabeth Warren has come out as kind of like an option as an olive branch to the Bernie supporters.
Here's why that's not going to work. Here's Elizabeth. Look, I love Elizabeth Warren. In the fall of 2019, I was a Warren supporter, and then I was converted to the Church of Yang. Elizabeth Warren will not be a successful olive branch to the Bernie supporters that you need it to be an olive branch to. The olive branch the olive branch to Bernie Sanders supporters would be an olive branch that to the people who called Elizabeth Warren a snake.
Yeah.
Okay. Personally, I don't really want those people's votes, but we need those people's votes.
Yeah.
And they didn't like Elizabeth Warren to begin with. A vast, vast majority of Bernie Sanders supporters are going to vote for Joe Biden, especially if AOC comes out and endorses him.
Yeah,
last thing that the Biden campaign needs is to be making a concession that isn't even a concession to progressives.
And the thing is, I'm going to go on this rant again. I'm not going to make it as long as last week, but voting for or not voting for Joe Biden takes away everything that Bernie has been working for his entire life and limits the possibilities of getting a lot of Bernie's plans achieved in the future in any near term. Short, concise. So having Elizabeth Warren as the person reaching out to the progressive base, first off, like you said, is not going to work because they already shut her out of, she's not a real progressive, that type of thing. But also they should be voting for Biden anyway. Any smart Bernie supporter knows that they should be voting for Biden so that Trump doesn't win and take away more rights from the people that Bernie is trying to protect.
Regardless of what gets said in YouTube comments.
Yes. but let's walk away from that point and go on to the other possible options.
Wow, you really just did that,
yeah.
didn't you?
So there are two other Midwestern senatorial women named Tammy that are on the list for vice presidential candidates: Tammy Baldwin and Tammy Duckworth, who I think both would make excellent VP.
Awesome. God, okay. Let's
so-
start with Tammy Duckworth because
Yes.
I have to start with Tammy
Yes.
Duckworth.
Tammy Duckworth.
So the first thing that you need to know about Tammy Duckworth is that her great-great-grandfather fought in the Continental Army.
Yes.
She's a veteran. She lost both of her legs in a helicopter crash. And
she's a person of color.
She's a person of color, that's right.
She's a mother.
She's a mother. Oh, and here's the best part. Here's the best part.
Yeah.
She got Mitch McConnell to change the Senate rules to allow her to bring her kid onto the Senate floor.
To breastfeed.
Yep.
So
amazing.
It's an incredible thing. And I think Tammy Duckworth is one of those people that might be attack proof because of everything about her history. What would Trump attack? Would he attack the fact that she's an amputee that lost her legs fighting for our country?
That's the thing. You know he would, because he already attacked Pirro. He already attacked John McCain for getting captured. I like people who don't lose both their legs. That's just me.
But like that would get extreme backlash, just like he got for McCain. Would he attack her for being a mother that breastfed on the Senate floor?
Melania would never breastfeed.
Like, it's just like, what would he actually attack her for? It'd be very, very hard. The other Tammy is Tammy Baldwin, who is the first openly gay person elected to the U.S. Senate. And I think, again, that would be a really interesting choice because she's popular in Wisconsin, but also she could get that progressive vote out just by virtue of who she is.
And also, imagine the vice presidential debate with the first openly gay senator and Mike Pence.
Again, like both of those debate stages would be amazing, thinking about Tammy Duckworth or Tammy Baldwin standing across from Mike Pence and Mike Pence trying to defend Trump's policies.
Oh my God.
Be very, very interesting to see.
Yes.
The other three names that Biden has alluded to, he's never actually said their names directly, but he's mentioned them by virtue of who they are. So he mentioned the former director, or the former deputy attorney general who was fired, that being Sally Yates, who was fired for not enforcing Trump's travel ban.
Yeah, I don't see that happening.
I don't think that would happen. It'd be cool in the sense that it's like a very direct middle finger to Trump.
I know.
But other than that, like, she hasn't really been that she hasn't been on the national playing field since 2017.
I didn't even know about this until literally just now.
Yeah. And then he also mentioned the two senators from New Hampshire who are Jeanne Shaheen and Maggie Hassan, who again,
Maggie Hassan is going to be a great member of the Democratic Party for a long time, but she has a few years to go before she really gets up there.
And Jeanne Shaheen is just, again, kind of has that Debbie Stabenow, like, just kind of one of the senators in the background.
Yeah.
Doesn't have, or even like a Tim Kaine type character where he's just kind of like, they're doing important stuff, but like they're not the ones speaking up about it like other senators are.
Absolutely.
Like even, Kamala, Amy, Liz, both Tammys are a lot more, especially Duckworth, a lot more vocal about what they do. And Maggie Hassan's definitely rising there, but she's
in that new generation of like Ayanna Pressley, Seth Moulton.
Give it and Chris Murphy also.
Chris Murphy.
The people that give it 10 years will be the leaders of the DNC.
Connor Lamb.
Yeah. So again, she wouldn't be the worst choice, but she doesn't have much of a platform other than the fact that she's a charismatic woman from a pivotal state.
Closing thoughts.
Yeah.
Who do you think they're going to pick? Who do you think would be the best?
I think they're probably going to pick Stacey Abrams. I think that either Amy Klobuchar or Tammy Duckworth would be the best choice, though.
I think they're going to pick Kamala.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I am really not happy about it. And I think that Klobuchar or Duckworth would be the best.
Yeah. How many names did we name here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we named 11 names. Out of all 11 names, Kamala is probably at
Hey
the
man,
highest, like
the
8th or
odds on
9th.
Kamala are 33%.
Yeah, right now the Vegas odds put a 33% chance that it's
And
Kamala.
she has been making the rounds
Yeah.
on cable news talk shows.
Hmm.
I saw her 3 times in 2 days.
Yeah, she's been kind of everywhere.
And she has been sounding like a vice presidential candidate, and it scares the hell out of me.
Yeah, she, probably has a role in the next administration. I don't think it's
Sure.
VP though.
I
She'd make a
really hope
good
it's
HHS. I think she'd be great there.
yeah,
Or
yeah,
like another,
HHS.
or
She has to
HUD,
reform herself.
or like another, or like a HUD type thing, where I think
Yes.
where it's like communicating with urban voters and like helping improve city conditions. I think that's something where she'd definitely be a really big and important person. I
Yes.
don't think that Kamala would be the best VP choice from a social politics or a geographic politics standpoint. And those are
Completely agree. She
typically the
has to
two
rework her brand.
reasons. Yeah. So there's our little bit on the VPs. So now let's move over to Trump's policies, promises, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
So he doesn't really have anything listed as to what he wants to do in his next term. He just has all the promises that he's kept on his website.
So I guess we should reward him by giving him another 4 years for keeping all those
Yeah, maybe,
promises. He
I
got it done, so let's give him more time.
I'm not exactly sure what the fact that he doesn't have any policies mean, but luckily, PolitiFact is also helping us out because they have a list of all of the Trump promises, kept or not kept. So after we go through promises kept for a little bit, we can touch on some other things
Yeah.
that were promises not kept or promises compromised or promises broken.
Yeah, so just now, PolitiFact, I don't think PolitiFact is terribly biased. I mean, they won not a what's the award for journalism? Pulitzer? Yeah.
Yeah.
PolitiFact has won a Pulitzer.
Yeah.
And I do believe that means something.
Yeah,
But that said, I understand that covering Trump does mean that you are an inherently left-wing institution.
yeah. And I mean, the thing is, like the argument against what you just said is that you could argue that the Pulitzer organization, whoever awards the Pulitzer, could also be biased. But regardless, PolitiFact is probably slightly left-leaning, but generally a reliable source. They list where they get their information from, and so at the very least, you can fact check PolitiFact.
And honestly, I think that slightly left-leaning is center these days. So
In terms of media, definitely. But
So
anyways, let's
what?
get
So
into policies or
PolitiFact has their
promises.
Trumpometer. Before we go into this, so they say he's kept 18% of his promises. He's compromised on 10%. He's broken 17%. He's stalled or is working on another 52%.
Yeah. So
Honestly, all things considered, I
not bad.
mean that's not bad. I feel like most other presidents would have a lot higher percentage of stalled or in the works. I just
Mhm.
ended up combining those two. But
Mhm.
17% promises broken, that's a little high. But if
Yeah, like
you'd have
for
told
having
me,
to be outright broken is pretty high, but also
yeah,
28% of what Trump said on the campaign trail he's done, which is not bad.
and considering all the crazy stuff Trump said on the campaign trail,
Yeah. Like
like
that's yeah.
if you'd have told me that Obama broke 17% of his promises, I'd be like, okay, that's a bit high. But if you told me like, let's say Obama broke like 10% of his promises,
I even believe like 14, 15.
yeah, I would believe that. So
Yeah.
if we're just trying to compare the two on the promises broken statistic, that's not.
Yeah. In terms of actually where he stands, it's not that insane, especially considering half of his term has been with a divided Congress.
Yes.
So it makes sense that, half of them are stalled or in the works. That
So
said,
we've
let's get into promises kept first.
exactly. So we've established that that what Trump has done in terms of how many he's kept, it's acceptable.
Yeah.
But what does that mean? What are the promises he's kept? So we're just going to go through his website here, literally promiseskept.com, and he's got 14 sections. Some of them are kind of hilarious
Yeah.
and make no sense. We will go through them.
Yeah, let's go through. So
Number 1, economy and jobs.
His big promises on the economy and jobs was tax reform, that he provided tax relief for 82% of middle class families. If you are of the low tax mindset, that's a good thing. He doesn't mention that he took out SALT, which raised taxes for pretty much everyone in any left leaning state.
He also cut lots of welfare programs,
Yeah,
which
was a promise
also
he
just
said he
generally
wouldn't do.
increase people's costs.
Yeah. So,
Wick.
but the base number of federal taxes that you pay went down, so that's a promise kept.
Yeah. And
Yes.
in the most generic sense of the word.
Yeah.
But I think for most people, their actual costs went up.
Yeah.
And that's part of the problem with that. But yeah, he was going to lower taxes. That was the promise. Okay.
And that was pretty much his only big promise in terms of economy and jobs. He also said, GDP growth, which isn't an actual real measurement of how the success of any individual person is doing, more just the country's producers as a whole. But it's been growing the way he's wanted it to, largely within 1% or like within 0.1%. And then also, jobs being created, just generally the fact that the economy has, except for the past like 2 months, been trending upwards for most of his presidency is what he's said for the rest of this section.
He really does associate how his presidency is doing with the stock market.
Yeah.
And the stock market is back to Obama levels.
It's a little higher, but yeah, it's not.
But again,
Yeah.
not his, well, partially his fault, but not entirely.
Yeah.
So, well, more on that later.
Mhm.
Number 2, immigration. I honestly thought this would be number 1, but I mean, I guess it's the
Yep.
economy, stupid. People run on it, and so Trump's going to try and run on it.
Yeah.
So, number 2 is immigration. He built the wall. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
He built 100 miles.
he built fence, and there's yeah. So like the wall has been built, and it has been funded, but like it's been funded after a 3-month government shutdown, and it's been funded for fences in very specific areas. So
Yeah.
he has built a wall along the southern border, but it's a fence on parts of the southern border that connects fence to other fence that it's already been there.
Yeah. So
Um,
it's not the big beautiful wall.
yeah,
It is a crappy chain link fence.
yeah, pretty much, or maybe
It's
two
not a
crappy.
crappy chain. I'm sure it's the best chain
Yeah,
link fence. I'm
and
sure it's the best
there are a
fence.
lot of places where it's like 2 chain link fences, but
Okay.
with barbed wire on top. But
Oh.
still. And then also he has hired a lot of ICE officials, and that's another
Yeah.
thing that he's mentioned, that he's been upping ICE, the number of ICE hirings, and also the ICE arrests, and that's something that he has a nice check mark for doing more. 269,419 arrests of illegal aliens through ICE through
Sure they're
federal year
updating that
2019.
statistic daily.
Yeah. So
Um
there's his immigration. There are a few other ones, but it's mostly about stopping illegal immigration, stopping or trying to disqualify sanctuary cities, which I don't know why that's counted as a promise kept, because that was overturned in the courts.
I have no idea.
But
Um
all that merit-based immigration reform that he's released his the president released his immigration reform proposal, which calls for the transition to a merit-based immigration plan. So that's a promise kept, that he released a proposal for a plan to do something. Um, so
I don't know if that didn't get done.
no,
So it's in the works.
yeah,
And he doesn't have to do everything. It's just
no,
let's call out the discrepancies. It's
yeah.
not
So
a
like,
promise kept if you haven't done it.
yeah, the first like 3 on any of these policies are promises that he's actually kept, at least in the way that they phrased them. So like,
Yes.
Trump called on Congress to fully fund a wall. Check. Yes. Trump pulled the U.S. out of negotiations for a global compact on migration. Yes. Under Trump's leadership, DHS took action to wind down DACA. Yes. Like if you look at the way it's actually phrased, it's that they haven't really done too much other than rescinding DAPA, declaring a national emergency to get extra funding for the wall, and hiring more ICE officials and upping arrests. Other than that, it's been a lot of proposals.
Here's a hilarious. So number 3,
Mhm.
trade and foreign policy. For the record, I feel like the president's biggest responsibility is foreign policy. So I'm actually kind of refreshed that there's a presidential candidate who's putting foreign policy near the top.
Yeah.
That said, I mean, this is Trump we're talking about, so let's go into it. President Trump kept his promise to crack down on trade cheaters and promote fair and equal trade for all Americans. First of all, Trump for fair trade? I don't see it.
So part of the thing is that one of the biggest fair trade agreements that would have forced, especially the biggest trade cheater, if you're going to call that, China, to cooperate in their trade agreement was called the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was the whole idea was that it was going to be America and a bunch of Pacific nations that all work together to trade and have good trading, fair trade networks, largely free trade, but with like obviously some discrepancies, that everyone was going to be able to work together. And because they were all cooperating, it would take business away from China and force China to improve their standards of trade so that they could join the TPP. That was the point of the TPP, and Trump left the TPP, which empowered China to sign TTIP, which is their own deal with all these nations.
Yep. Now, look, Hillary Clinton also came out against TPP.
Yes. So
not great.
It was doomed because it was actually the reason Hillary came out against. So sorry, TTIP is not TTIP's Atlantic. Excuse me, but
China hasn't signed a trade agreement with ASEAN, really. No. They've just kind of been doing their thing and working to control ASEAN where they can.
Yeah. But Bernie came out against TPP. Hillary was indifferent towards it, and he pushed her to be against TPP because Bernie's very much a protectionist when it comes to trade.
Bad Bernie on that one.
Because that doomed TPP. People like my mom, whose like career is in trade, like she was like, well, I mean, no candidate wants the thing that keeps me employed.
And no candidate wants the thing that would probably be the most successful tool in order to make China a peer partner rather than a competitor.
Yeah.
That's a key difference.
The TPP would force China to abide by these rules, or else they would significantly lose trading power to, Singapore and to Taiwan and to the Philippines and to Japan, where stuff would start to move in its like creation and trade from China to there.
So instead of TPP, the Trump administration entered bilateral negotiations with the Chinese that were handled incredibly poorly. I can go into that on another episode, but basically nobody in the administration understood how the Chinese negotiated and how Chinese signaling worked. And so they just completely messed up the entire negotiating process. It took three times as long as it should have.
Yeah, it took 3 years for them to come out with stage one.
And stage one was a disaster. Okay, not only did it have concessions for every single fossil fuel industry, and I mean literal concessions, it was almost impossible for China to keep up with the concessions. So like $200 billion of agricultural products, specifically milk, specifically dairy and soy, China hadn't been consuming at that level ever. So why are they buying all this stuff from us that they don't need? It was literally a political concession. Also, they had to spend, it was 120 billion, I think, on fossil fuels. We didn't need to force China to buy to give ExxonMobil $120 billion. Why did that have to happen? And on top of it all, it didn't do anything really to address intellectual property theft. No. It didn't force China to change the way that it's policing international intellectual property theft. And it gave China the one thing that it's been really hoping. It gave China the one thing that it's been really hoping for, and that's liquid access to our financial markets. So now we can send our financial services companies who lest we not forget crashed the economy a decade ago, can now go into the most dangerous lending environment in the entire world and take on loans that have a 40% chance of being completely worthless.
Yes.
Okay, I think I'm done.
So that's we're going to have to do our own episode on trade probably.
Oh boy.
And kind of talk about how both candidates have it wrong.
Anyway, long story short, phase one could have been a lot better.
Yeah. So he talks about first thing that he raised tariffs on steel and aluminum, which actually generally were a Democratic win
I
for
think
Trump.
everybody wanted to do that.
A lot of people did. A lot of the people that spoke out against it were actually Republicans. Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and Bob Casey all I know spoke in favor, and they're like, "Thank you, we needed to do this."
Yeah.
A lot of the steel Democrats, the Midwestern steel Democrats, were like, "Yeah,
Yes.
this is a good thing."
Yes.
It was the kind of like economic Republicans that were upset about it, especially like the Rand Pauls and Ben Sasses of the Senate were not very happy. But generally, the steel and aluminum tariffs, which ended up staying in new NAFTA, were generally seen as a thing that should have been done with steel dumping in China.
Yes. Here's
Yeah.
to completely change gears. You know what's not on his foreign policy page? North Korea.
Mm-hmm.
It's not there. Like I agree that it doesn't deserve to be there, but
that's a huge. Trump has done a lot in North Korea.
He's done a lot for North Korea.
Trump has done things in North Korea that other presidents have not, in for good and for bad. Ultimately, that the agreement that he signed with Kim Jong-un was the agreement that Kim was willing to sign as Obama left office. The whole nuclear standoffs that we had ultimately didn't budge either party. But Trump being the first president to visit North Korea, that should go on his page. That's a cool thing that he's done. I guess he just didn't talk.
Did he visit North Korea or did he go to Singapore?
He stepped over the border. Remember at the DMZ.
Oh right.
Yeah. So he was the first U.S. president to visit North Korea, and that's a pretty big thing.
It is.
Actually engaging with negotiations with North Korea, like these are stuff that other presidents haven't necessarily done, and that's something he could brag about. Especially considering he's bragged about stuff that's much less of an achievement than that.
Yeah, that's why it's kind of confusing that it's not on here. The other thing that's on this page that is really weird, here, I'll just read this quote directly with the check mark next to it.
Yes.
The president kept his promise to roll back the Obama administration's bad deal on Cuba that benefited the Cuban regime at the expense of the Cuban people. Whatever happened to America first?
Yeah, so the bad deal was that that America would trade with Cuba and lift the travel ban on Cuba.
Man, what a horrible deal.
Increasing tourism in Cuba. Cuba is a communist state, semi.
Tourism is one of the most organic forms of
free
generating a market.
It's a very, tourism, and the tourism industry is a very free market industry.
It's incredibly sustainable.
If you want to topple Cuba's communist state, then expose them to capitalism, expose them to free market
tourism.
Economics. Yeah, expose them to the people that are rich enough to go to Cuba and buy a ton of stuff and pay money at their resorts and be like, whoa, these people, these Americans, they have money. Maybe their economic system is right.
Although Trump might have been doing us a favor because we might have just been exposing Cuba to the Karens of the world. I don't know.
Yeah. But there's that on Cuba.
All right. We've talked enough about foreign policy.
Yeah, we're going to have to do our own episode on trade and foreign policy.
Yikes. Okay, national security and defense. Yeah. Usually an easy win for the Republican Party. No exceptions here. The most amount of spending allocated to the military in the history of this country. To rebuild it, he spent $20 billion on an aircraft carrier that the Navy wanted him to spend on cybersecurity. But you know what? An aircraft carrier is cool.
And they're always, you can have too many aircraft carriers. The U.S. doesn't necessarily, because we can always use another aircraft carrier.
Yeah, we can always use more power projection.
Yeah.
Increasing defense spending, reversing the defense sequester. As a Democrat, I don't like that, but Republicans wanted it, so it counts as a victory. In terms
of getting Republican voters that care about national security to vote for him, this is his national security page is exactly what you'd expect and exactly what will get him those votes. The people, this is very much. Oh, here he talks about North Korea, but this is where he talks about the things that will get those not necessarily war hawk Republicans, but the very pro-military Republicans to vote for him. That's exactly what you see here. That's exactly what you expect to see here.
Yeah. Also, apparently he cracks down on chemical weapons users. That's not true.
he did launch the airstrike against Assad's
after
regime.
telling Assad where he was striking.
Yeah. You don't have to say that in the campaign website, though.
Yeah,
but
just
like
important details.
Yeah.
All right. Regulation.
So, it's pretty much what you expect.
Yeah.
The next section is regulation, and again, very much what you expect.
Only a Republican candidate would have an entire page of his website devoted to regulation. I will say the executive order saying that for every one new regulation, you have to cut two, annoyingly effective.
Yeah, that's been one of the areas where he's really, really kept his promise in terms of deregulating a lot of the U.S. He has been deregulating consistently, and again, just like the economy, if that's what you're like into, he's done that, like very much so. He has been deregulating pretty much every sector of the state-owned and state-operated economy.
Also, he has pulling out of the Paris Climate Accords under deregulation.
Because he doesn't have an environment section also, which is interesting that he put it under regulation and not, environment.
No, he has an environment section. It's lower on the cord, but the interesting thing is that he counts the Paris Accord as deregulation, even though it wasn't binding.
Yeah, it was non-binding.
I got rid of non-binding deregulations, everybody.
Sounds like the Chinese.
Ooh. More on that later.
Yeah.
Land and agriculture. I will say Trump has done if you just look at this with I think a lot of this is relatively fair.
Mm-hmm.
And
disaster relief, the Farm Bill, which was a huge bipartisan bill, supported by basically anyone not on the coasts that were part of the large amount of America that is largely farmland.
Yeah. His SEC. I don't know who. Do you know the committee that approves mergers? Is it the SEC?
I believe so.
It was either the SEC or the the SEC or the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, approved the merger between Sprint and T-Mobile. And while you might rightly say, doesn't that sound like corporate consolidation? And now we only have 3 major players in the telecommunications market. I would say that you're correct. T-Mobile, though, is doing a massive campaign to try and extend rural broadband.
Mm-hmm.
And Trump has allocated a $50 billion fund for rural infrastructure development. How well that's being used, I'm not entirely aware, but if it's been allocated, that's probably a pretty good thing. The one thing on here that is incredibly misleading that I have to point out is the third check mark, which is that says that the Department of Agriculture issued guidance that would give more flexibility, keyword flexibility, to state operations of the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP. That is polishing a turd sandwich.
That SNAP is very much like a food stamp type program.
He cut SNAP. Then he called it flexibility.
He cut SNAP and told states to fund it themselves. Which is
are you serious?
Yeah, but the other things he has done with upping disaster relief bills following the hurricanes and wildfires and all the other natural disasters we've been having since he took office.
As we've covered before, disaster relief has not exactly been successful.
No, it's more been disaster prevention that he needs. But, and the Farm Bill was a very good accomplishment from him. Industrial hemp is now legal, which is going to hopefully lower the costs of a lot of things because hemp can be used for a lot of different purposes.
Everybody's going to be on that CBD eventually. We can thank Trump. Oddly enough.
Yeah. Next up is law and justice.
Law and order, make America safe again.
He's had a very actually interesting justice reform with the First Step Act.
But the First Step Act isn't on the website.
The First Step Act was a thing that freed a bunch of like non-violent drug offenders and is like the first step to improving relations between, cops and people and improving prison conditions and just like general justice reform.
And we've covered the First Step Act a little bit before. It's bipartisan. It's between literally Cory Booker and Jared Kushner.
Yeah, it got a standing ovation for like a minute during his State of the Union address, not mentioned at all.
By Democrats as well. Democrats applauded.
Yes, everyone, like universal stand up.
I don't know if a single person except for I can think of a few people because they don't think it doesn't go far enough. But the
No.
First Step Act is literally it's the perfect first step, and it's not on here. It just, the fact that the First Step Act isn't on here just signals to me that this is a website for the base and only the base. And then he's not trying to expand a coalition. He's just trying to solidify the existing coalition and get them to turn out.
That's pretty much been his strategy. Not officially, but there have been leaks that his big thing is not trying to win over any new voters, because he knows largely he can't do that. But it's trying to get all those voters that might like him and not want to vote for him to vote for him. So he's been doing a lot of efforts in like Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, to get over extra voters, instead of trying to get extra voters in maybe Ohio, where everyone's already pretty much made up their mind, but going to like states with older populations to try and turn out the vote there. And a website like this is what they might want to see, because this website kind of shows that return to the great America that he's been talking about his whole time.
Also, they have taking illegal guns off the streets. Keyword illegal, but still. All right, let's get to energy and environment. So here's that environment section for you. And the first point of the environment page is the Department of Interior proposed its largest oil and gas lease of over 78 million acres of the Gulf of Mexico. Man, I wonder if anything bad has happened previously in the Gulf of Mexico when they opened it up to offshore drilling.
Season. Definitely not twice something bad has happened in the Gulf of Mexico.
Oh, well, we'll actually, no. We're going to give it to Shell. We're not going to give it to BP, so it'll be fine.
Yeah, because it was the British fault, not the Americans' fault.
Yeah.
He, approved Keystone XL and Dakota Access pipelines, both of which were built using foreign steel, fun fact.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's
why they leak so much.
Expanded offshore oil and gas drilling. He allowed financing for coal and fossil fuel energy projects. He rescinded President Obama's costly clean power plan. So a lot of like undoing pro-environment websites. Any moderate person that's like, I care about the environment, goes to his website, goes to the environmental page, will not be happy with what they see.
Which again, is he going for the moderates based on this? Not so sure about that.
It's tough to see that he would be.
I mean, his EPA director, or the initial EPA director, Scott, oh my God, I can't remember his name, but he was the guy who was spending $127 on pens.
Yeah, Pruitt.
Talked about and bought himself a soundproof booth. Were managing. He was an environment manager. He was not a protector of the environment. It's the Environment Management Agency, guys.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about government accountability. Oh
so
boy.
This is his Drain the Swamp section.
So, how did he drain the swamp? He signed a 5-year ban on lobbying and a lifetime ban on lobbying for foreign countries.
Yeah, so if you are... Good Trump. This is a very good thing that Trump's done. If you are a member of Congress and you lose your election, that you have to, or you're any sort of federal employee, but especially for Congress people, you cannot lobby for foreign countries for 5 years, or you can't lobby in general. But if you are a federal employee, then you cannot lobby for a foreign country, period. Which I
didn't think that needed to be said out loud, but Michael Flynn reminded us that it did.
Yeah, so good thing that we did that. That's a very good thing that he did. More regulation on lobbyists can never hurt. There's already so many, and more are in the works, and that's great.
By the way, so fourth bullet point on here, President Trump called for a full audit of the Pentagon. Guess that wasn't such a surprise at all when we saw it before. So
and again, like a full audit of the Pentagon and like redoing their entire finances would not be a bad thing if that is done with fiscal conservatism in mind, to try and like make the budget as efficient as possible for the DoD, and like as use as little spending to get as much done as possible. That would be an incredibly good thing for the budget and for the American economy.
Here's the only telling thing about his government accountability page. It's got a total of 2 check marks.
Yeah.
So I don't know what that says about draining the swamp.
A lot of the rest has like 10, 15 check marks. It says 2.
Really, when it comes to accountability, he's just made a lot of federal employees kind of really concerned about their jobs and hiring freezes and things like that.
Yeah. Now, healthcare is something that Trump has been decidedly not successful on with the failure of the American Health Care Act. But he still has a good bunch of check marks on his website, mostly talking about expanding healthcare in rural communities, again, where his voter base is the strongest. Having tax cuts is on healthcare, as well as repealing the individual mandate, which, let me quote, forced people to buy expensive insurance and taxed those who couldn't afford it. So first off, the Supreme Court says that it was
Force people to take care of
fee,
themselves.
not they said it was a tax, so that's using Supreme Court's language. But second off, the mandate did not disproportionately affect the poor because the poorest people didn't have to pay into the individual mandate. But it did affect the lower middle class, which is what he's talking about here. He did eventually extend CHIP.
After a long, I can't believe he's taking credit for that.
Yeah, he defunded CHIP and threatened to like completely cancel it, and then after a ton of negotiation, I think during the lockdown or during the shutdown,
this is one of the things that the government got shut down for.
Then he extended it. But very good thing again, the FDA has approved the largest number of generic drugs in history. Awesome.
Yes.
Awesome. That is amazing. That's great. He's done a lot for pharmaceutical drugs that have lowered the cost, and it's great.
I've noticed there are a lot more companies that are that have started in the past 2-3 years that are exclusively devoted to helping people get lower prices for their prescriptions.
Yeah, one thing you'll notice now in most pharmaceutical, if not all pharmaceutical commercials, they'll say the cost of the drug in the commercial now. That is new. That's a Trump regulation. That's a very good thing because that's just more transparency, and transparency leads to a freer, more open market.
Good Trump.
Furthermore, hospitals have to include the prices of their all of their prices before the treatment is given to you. So beforehand, you go in to give birth, you don't know how much it's going to cost, you don't know how much the epidural is going to cost, you don't know how much a band-aid is going to cost, you don't know how much skin-to-skin contact with your child will cost, because some hospital paid a fee for that, for holding your child after you gave birth to them. Now the hospitals have to tell you if they're doing that. Again, awesome.
Good Trump.
PrEP is given to uninsured patients for free. Great. That's very, very good. There are a lot of things that they are doing that are very good, but their key points in healthcare have been objectively failures. Obamacare still exists, healthcare.gov is still around, and the American Health Care Act is no longer a bill.
Trump has been doing everything he can to stop people from using the one semblance there is of a public option.
Yeah.
By the way, the fact that there's an enrollment period for Obamacare is just ridiculous. Why can't you enroll in Obamacare year round?
It's our healthcare
what
system.
A joke.
Yeah,
guys. We have this public option, but it's only an option for 12 weeks out of the year. Really?
I guess it's the compromise you have to come to. So he has 4 more platforms that we're going to have to kind of speed through: infrastructure and technology, social programs, education, and veterans.
Okay, so as far as let's do infrastructure, because he really ran hard on infrastructure.
And infrastructure is a big thing that a lot of people vote on.
I haven't seen any roads being repaved. No, that's not true. I mean, but roads are always being repaved.
Infrastructure generally is a hard thing to run on just because it is largely a state issue.
Yes.
I don't think there's a federal Department of Transportation, and if there is, it's not a very powerful one.
The Department of Transportation is a cabinet office.
Yes, but the federal Department of Transportation is not a very consequential one because there's the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, Massachusetts, and Virginia.
Exactly.
And every state has their Department of Transportation that actually is the one that builds the roads and decides what roads are going to be built.
And the Trump administration is incredibly aware of this. On the website, 80% of the rural infrastructure program funds, that's $50 billion of funds, go directly to the governor of each state, as determined by a formula, which is probably just population, whatever.
Yeah, but he's been funding infrastructure more. That's his one big. The Democrats have been for a long time, and a lot of congressional Republicans also, wanting to work with Trump on an actual infrastructure plan.
Didn't really get much publicity. I didn't know this happened.
That was when Pelosi stormed out. One of the times where Pelosi stormed out of the White House. So it's been going nowhere. Those were private meetings. We can't say whose fault that is, but infrastructure, he's been giving more money, but other than that, not much. Next,
social programs. I think it's wild to put the bit about drug addiction and opioid abuse in here, because I feel like that should go under healthcare. But you know what? Fine. He can. I don't think he should count that as a promise kept, because really it's been state AGs that have been going after pharmaceutical manufacturers, Purdue Pharma, the Sacklers, etc.
Yeah, but again, what he's done is just like infrastructure. He's given more money to states to fight this issue, which is again a good thing.
That's probably what the federal government should be doing. I like leaving it to the states.
Yeah. However, there are some regions of the country that really, really need help that he hasn't directly addressed, which again, for a Republican president who wants to, increase federalism and decentralize, is not out of character.
Mm-hmm.
That's mostly what he talks about in a lot of these, because it's kind of like a tricky situation where a lot of Republicans don't like social safety net programs, but a lot of older Trump voters love social safety net programs.
Yes.
So he can't say much else. He also does talk about abortion in this. Again, just very pro-life.
Keep your government hands off my Medicare.
Yeah. Education.
Oh boy. Okay. Look.
Betsy DeVos.
So number one, he appointed Betsy DeVos. Great start. And Trump's been, I don't want to say defunding public schools, but look, it's when you have a limited amount of money, it's not a positive sum game. It is a neutral sum game. So if you take money away from public schools, or you give if you give money to charter schools, you're taking away money from public schools, which usually means you're taking away money from the public schools that need it the most. Urban inner city schools, which means they can't feed kids.
Yeah, it's a self-fulfilling cycle or self-fulfilling spiral, really.
School choice.
Schools get worse, so people take their kids out of schools, which means the schools get less funding if you don't have to pay for those schools. So if you get that voucher, you take your funding away from that school, so the school gets even worse, which means more people leave and our public education system starts to collapse.
Absolutely right. School choice is probably one of the best things that the Republicans have done for branding in the past 10 years.
Because
what a brilliant thing to say. We're going to give you more options, guys.
Yeah, there are a lot of other education reforms that need to happen first, especially in terms of public schools, because funding does not directly correlate necessarily with better school systems, because there's so much more that needs to go into it, and taking funding away from important school systems that need funding is not necessarily the best thing. But moving on, the last section, veterans. I'm surprised again, veterans is at the very end.
Yeah. Biden has it incredibly high.
Yeah.
I don't know much about what Trump's done for veterans, and I mean, like, it's really difficult to discern what an administration has done for veterans and how the veterans feel about it, because I think if the veterans are happy, then it was a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what it should be about. I think that veterans are generally positive about the changes that have been made, but they have been gradual changes. But that said, the VA is such an encumbersome institution that I don't think it's possible to make these sweeping changes. He's made it easier to fire employees and protect whistleblowers.
But what gets weird, so he announced, so the next bullet point is signing the unanimous bill, the Veterans Appeals Improvement and Modernization Act, which is, better disability claims in Veterans Affairs. Great. Up next is the Harry Colmery Veterans Educational Assistance Act, which funded the post 9/11 GI Bill. Which, if you remember,
they almost didn't refund that.
If you remember that post 9/11 GI Bill, you probably remember Jon Stewart coming in to testify to Congress and crying because the Republicans would not fund that bill.
We had to bring Jon Stewart out of retirement. He didn't even have time to shave because he had to go and stand with those 9/11 first responders. He had to do it a few years ago as well. And in between then and now, or not in between then and now. So he did it a few years ago, but he had to do it like a few years before that
Yeah.
because for some reason the Republicans don't want to fund it. And I say the Republicans because the Republicans are the leaders of the committee who were not getting it through. So many of those first responders died in between the two hearings, and it was just hard.
Yeah, it's
so unfortunate. And it's the one thing that Jon Stewart is actually politically active about. For all the things he used to do and all the things he used to say, the only thing he actually ever showed that he gave a crap about was the GI bill, the 9/11 first responders bill. And they almost didn't pass it. Like the fact that I don't know, it's just so, that's the real problem, I think, with everything that we've been talking about, is that sure, we can say like good Trump this, good Trump that, but it's not, you don't feel like you're aware of the good Trump things he's done. And the key job of a president, not only for himself but for the party, is signaling. And you think that Trump would be great at signaling. He's a marketing master. Turns out that's been probably the biggest failure of his presidency, that he has not been good at all at delivering positive signals to the country.
Yeah, it's been a very like negatively framed. It's I'm doing this to stop this from happening, not I've made your lives better from this. But again, we'd love to see what policies he wants to have in his next in his next term. But the RNC has not released any even like party platform since 2016. There is no comprehensive list of even Republican policies, let alone Trump policies, that's not from 4 years ago.
Now there is power to that. There is
Yeah.
an inherent, dare I say, freedom that comes out of not having a party platform, because then you can have a ideologically diverse array of candidates. So you can have your Roy Moores in Alabama, and you can have your your Luke Negrons in PA 18.
Yeah.
And so it allows people to run to their district, which is something that the Democrats need to learn from.
The
That
thing
said,
is, generally, in terms of the people that actually do get elected, because especially in Republican states, there is a good bunch of gerrymandering. There also is in Democratic states, but you see this as an effect more in Republican states. All the Republicans that end up getting elected are pretty much the same and have very, very similar policies, unless they're from a very moderate place, like, your Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski's. It's very rare to see a senator that is not like at 50%. Like there's like every senator is pretty much in this exact spot except for like the Murkowskis and the Pauls.
Correct.
And like there's very little actual ideological diversity in the Republican Party.
Balanced budgets, limited government, defense of traditional American values.
But like balanced budgets, kind of. But limited government, kind of. But defense of traditional American values is like kind of
but I would argue that traditional American values are changing, but that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah, but the Trump campaign and the RNC in general does not have a platform that we could analyze, despite the fact that we really would love to. So please, guys, give us policies that we can work on so we can actually fairly go head to head, because we can't say, here's what Biden wants in healthcare, what does Trump want in healthcare, and let's go head to head. That's what we were planning on doing in a few weeks from now, but we can't.
And if you're going to do that, please, like the Biden campaign did, release a comprehensive expense report. Try to make a case for how much it's going to cost and why we should be paying that much.
Yeah.
Say what you will about Biden's policies, and we already have. They exist.
Yeah.
So.
And I can say, for everyone listening to this, regardless of what you think about Biden's policies, what Biden is running on, and what Biden wants to do. What does Trump want to do in healthcare going forward? What does Trump want to do in education going forward? What does Trump want to do in a majority of his policies going forward? Who's to say?
Who's to say?
And like we don't know if it's going to be the same. We don't know if he's going to be like, well, I want this to be different, because we do not have anything to check. With that said, it is now 3:36 p.m., so our time is just about up for this afternoon.
Gotta get better on these recording times. Yikes. And a better outro, because this is getting rough. Our intro and outro music, however, is by Paul Abrams and Rock Solid Panda. And as always, produced by Elise Duda.
You can find a recording of this podcast on our YouTube channel, Catch52, as well as on our Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. You can also find clips of any of these episodes, and also you'll be able to keep up to date on airtimes, episode topics, and possibly any other upcoming guests you might be having.
Absolutely. We are on Instagram now. Our Twitter is actually starting to be active, at 52catch.
For both of those, and then just Catch52 Podcast, I believe, for Facebook.
That's right. We welcome your comments, your feedbacks, your suggestions. I said feedbacks again. But, as always, have a good Friday and a great weekend.